Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cartoon Crossroads Columbus 2023. It is so great to be here. I also can't say enough how much I'm looking forward to talking to our guest, Tauhid Bondia.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it is awesome to be here. This is really like one of my first one of these things, and I'm having a fantastic experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's actually what I loved about. I mean, as is the case when I'm asked to do something like this, I usually start a conversation beforehand, so that we can jump in. And for those of you who don't know, Tauhid is a recently syndicated cartoonist, which is as far as like syndicating comic strips it's much more rare than it was, say, even 5 years ago, right? So I want to like jump in at the beginning of that conversation. His syndicated comic strip is behind us, Crabgrass. Here's some. I like having images up just for illustration, so you don't have to had followed or read every word on these. but we're talking about art, and I think you should see the art. But yeah, I just wanted to start with that. Like, why and how did you first become interested in comics? And then the follow up to that is in particular cartoons, because people are interested in comics. Sometimes they come to them through comic books, but.
Right.
But tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I never really know where to begin. I've got like 3 places that I usually start from when people ask me that question. Like the earliest memory of my interest in comics was drawing Spider-Man from my bed sheets when I was like 4. And yeah, no, I drew a picture of Spider-Man from my bed sheet, showed it to my mom, and she was like visibly impressed. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing I can do. And that's kind of what got me into, drawing in comics. I did, when it comes to comic strips, I was really kind of initiated into that by the Garfield and Peanuts collections in my school library. The teacher would make us go, and this was about 4th grade, teachers would make us go to the library and get a book, and a few of us figured out there was a loophole that had these comics collections counted as a book. So we would rush down there, and I just, devoured all of them multiple times, and loved it so much. That really kind of put comic strips on my radar. But, then like a lot of people, I got into comic books, as I became an angsty teenager, right around the time of the comic artist superstars of Image. I really wanted to be a comic book artist, but I could never finish anything. It was a matter of also just a lot of things that I didn't want to draw. I did not want to draw mailboxes and houses and sidewalks, and I wanted to draw superheroes fighting each other. But also, when you're drawing comic books, long-form comic books, you can slave away for hours and finish a page, or I could. And then I still got to do 22, 23, 4 more pages to complete a thing. And it was really hard for me to keep momentum to actually finish a project. But with comic strips, I can do 4 panels and I've finished something. And that momentum carries right on to the next thing. And then next thing you know, you've got a stack of comic strips. And that's when I realized I was kind of cut out for that, probably in my early 20s. Is when I really kind of got into it. And then I've just been making comic strips ever since, waiting for somebody to notice.
Well, and I think that, I mean, what's interesting about comic strips, and interesting about the time that you're talking about comic strips, is that's really when they're kind of, when you see, we're seeing much more of a decline in the late 90s of print publications, right? So what, I mean, you said that you initially were seeing comic strips in collections in the library. Were you reading them in any periodicals, any newspapers, magazines?
I remember having a Sunday Funnies experience as a kid, but I don't know exactly when, because I know in the house that I grew up in, we didn't necessarily get the newspaper. I would sometimes go visit my father in Virginia, and he'd get the newspaper, or just like, pick up a newspaper somewhere when you're out and immediately turn to see if the funnies were still in there. So, but not on a regular basis. Most of my exposure to comic strips was through collections at the library as I got older, buying them in bookstores and things like that. That's kind of how I digested that material.
Okay, so and you say that that you're interested in doing comic books, and then you found yourself
Right.
doing comic strips. Could you tell us a little bit more about that transition, especially what initiated you going what really doing comic strips, but also I'd like for us to get into the syndication process, because most of us it's like syndication to the outside world looks like, oh wow, there's this new strip, but when you're involved in it, it's like you spend years being suddenly discovered.
Yeah, for sure. No, I have to say that what caused the catalyst of that sort of transition from comic books to comic strips was actually the emergence of webcomics. The drumbeat has been for a very long time now that newspapers are going away and comic strips are dying. And, it's a very old dream of mine to be a comic strip artist. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to do it on the web now. And I was seeing these people kind of blow up and become webcomic famous. I joined a forum around a webcomic called Penny Arcade. And there's an artist forum there. And I sort of met a lot of my current day friends in that forum, and critiqued people's comics, critiqued each other's comics, and it was sort of a built-in audience whenever I launched my first webcomic called Spells and Whistles. I think you have a slide for that. Yeah, that one right there. My first...
Close up of it.
Yeah, that was my first webcomic. It was trash. It was... At the time, I was... In fact, for like the first 3 webcomics I ever did, it was just, what's really hot right now? What's a built-in audience that I can tap into? And I wanted to be the guy that was doing the, I guess, Tolkien-esque swords and sorcery fantasy comic strip gag a day. There were already people doing it better, but I thought I was going to jump on that bandwagon. But it really wasn't my wheelhouse. I wasn't a super fan of that kind of thing. I just thought, other people really like it, so I can capitalize. And it didn't do that great. And just because of that, so I did that for about a year, and then I did the next webcomic, which was Good Ship Chronicles, I think. And that one was, what if I combined Star Trek and The Office? 2 very big...
Is that this one?
Yeah, that's that one. I thought, this one's going to make me webcomics famous for sure, and it did not. I did that one for about another year or 2. Then... The Walking Dead got real popular, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do a gag-a-day zombie comic strip called The Angry Dead, and that was sort of my pattern for a while. Yeah, yeah, and nobody knew who I was, rightly so at the time. I just kept putting out these new ideas and new comics, and not kind of getting anywhere with them. But that was my transition from comic books to comic strips. I really just kind of got my legs under me doing these 3 comics.
Is there another one?
Yeah, that one, A Problem Like Jamal, that was the first one anyone ever noticed. That one kind of came about after 2016 happened, and everybody's world turned upside down. I was really, at that time, super anxious about a lot of things and had a lot of outrage, and I couldn't draw anymore because, that hierarchy of needs, art is at the top, and you have to take care of like safety and stuff at the bottom. And very suddenly for me and people that I love, the world didn't feel like a safe place. I was on the internet screaming into the void a lot, going to protests and things like that. And eventually it occurred to me, well, why don't you use your art to kind of focus these things that you're trying to say? And that's when I came up with this comic strip about a little black activist kid named Jamal. And that resonated with a lot of people at the time. And I started to get a kind of attention that I'd never experienced before, and hundreds into thousands of readers. And the comic kind of did its job. It was very cathartic for me and allowed me to kind of unload a lot of that anxiety. And people's response to the comics sort of restored my faith in humanity again. And, once it calmed me back down, I guess, the voice for the comics sort of started to peter out. There wasn't as much outrage, and it started to feel more and more forced. And I didn't want to betray the spirit of the comic by just dragging it out to try and profit off of it somehow. So I went ahead and put it on hiatus. But I had a taste of people paying attention to me. And so around this time, I had gotten laid off from my job, the company that I worked for, Wet Pumpkin. I don't know if anybody knows what that is. It was built around a comic strip called Homestuck, which was super popular a bunch of time ago, yeah. So that company got sold, and a lot of us just were suddenly unemployed. I went on unemployment for a while and tried to get on at a big time, grown-up design firm as a graphic designer. Couldn't get any callbacks. And I was coming to the end of my unemployment, and my wife and I sat down and had a discussion. I said, look, I really want to try to make something of this comic strip thing, kind of a Hail Mary. I want to go for it. And if it doesn't work, then I will, just be a hobbyist and find whatever job I can take. And my wife knew that that was the only thing that I could do to be happy, that otherwise I'd be miserable. So she was like, go for it. And she supported us financially while I went on that endeavor. And that day we sat down at an ice cream shop in Elizabethtown, a town over from where we live, and we came up with the idea for Crabgrass. It was her idea to set the comic in this sort of nebulous late 80s, early 90s time. And when I came up with Kevin and Miles, the main characters, I didn't realize I was doing something sort of pseudo-autobiographical at the time. It's just, I was raised on Nickelodeon. Kevin was a chaos agent, so naturally he was this redheaded kid. And I had just come off of drawing A Problem Like Jamal, so I had no fear of making a black kid a protagonist in the comic strip.
I have the original designs for the characters.
that was what we started with. And this was about a year and a half into the development period. This was actually between these two. This mess. I had a weird panic while we were in development that I had just totally ruined the character designs. Those big dinner plate eyes were too big and were limiting their expression, and I just needed to redesign them from the ground up. And I came up with that. And my editor at the time, Sheena Wolf, very diplomatically said,
We all know Sheena.
Yes. She said, so maybe you can explain to me what it is you like about these designs. Which at the time I thought, oh yeah, that's a valid question. Looking back, I thought, oh, okay, I see what she was saying. I don't like anything about these designs. Maybe you can tell me what you like. But she kind of talked me down from that. And in fact, some of the strips that you showed earlier were, I made a couple of strips with those designs to see how they work. And that's what helped me understand that they don't work. This right here is what the characters look like now. So they've gone through three main sort of evolutions. And which I know that there's artistic drift when it comes to comic strip over time. You can expect it. But I've kind of gone in through the development period and just like, gotten to know the characters more, and over time realized what they actually look like. So I would sit down and just sort of redraw them. I think we've hit the sweet spot here, though. That's kind of.
Well, let's go back a little bit to the beginning of the development period.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I had a long conversation about this. That I'd love to kind of resurrect for all of you so you decided that you were going to make a go at it, and you get the call. So what happened? What was that like?
Yeah. Okay. There was. By the time that I decided that I was going to make Crabgrass, I was like, I'm going to go for syndication, which was a weird decision, like I said, at the time, for anybody to make it in 2019. I had an in, I guess. I knew Sheena. She approached me about A Problem Like Jamal and putting that on Go Comics. And so I knew I definitely wanted to I definitely wanted to put this comic on Go Comics. And I also kind of wanted to put a bug in her ear. So I abused that relationship and sent her an email directly with a few of the comics that I put together after my wife and I came up with the premise. And was just like, hey, look, I'm putting together this new comic strip, sort of pointing it at syndication. Any tips or any notes that you have would be fantastic. And that was sincerely what I was trying to do. I wanted to find out how to put together a good submission packet, and who better to ask than, Sheena Wolf. And her reply was, send me a few more comics so that I can get a better sense of the world. And I was like, awesome, she's gonna really kind of do a deep dive and help me out here. And so that weekend I put together, I think, a couple more weeks of comics and sent them to her. And then she replied to that with, do you have time for a call sometime this week? And I was like, yeah, cool, okay, yeah, we can do this. Probably better to do it over the phone. And then she called me and offered me a print deal on the spot. And yeah, it just happened very suddenly. So suddenly, in fact, that I didn't know what was happening. I thought she was offering me some kind of like next tier web syndication on Go Comics, like maybe they put it on the front page or promote it a little more, something like that. So after I hung up the phone, I kind of replayed the conversation in my head, and I emailed her and I said, are you talking about print syndication like in newspapers? And she said, yeah, dude. Like, I could have sent you an email if it was just Go Comics or whatever. And I was like, I did a cartwheel in my house. It was such an amazing moment. And it was what I was aiming for, but not necessarily how I anticipated getting there. But then I was there and, began to find out kind of all about what that process was. Stuff that, I don't know, that why there's such a shroud of secrecy about what it's like to be syndicated or the process involved and things like that. I guess even at the time I thought, okay, great, I'm going to be in newspapers like next week. And no, there's a whole development period that can take 2 to 4 years. And I think we did a good 2.5 years on Crabgrass. And during that time, the premise of your comic can change completely. Your characters' names, things. In fact, Miles was named Curtis in the very beginning, and it took me a minute to realize why I thought Curtis was such a good name for a little black kid. And then once I realized, I was like, okay, we got to change that. Yeah.
Tell me about what are some other things that happened during the development period? I mean, I know that we talked about like you have also having to create issues so that you can bank them for the future.
Yeah. That's one good thing for about the development period. It's a time to prove that you can produce regularly over long stretches of time. A lot of people wash out during that process. By the time we got done with our development period, I had something like 8 months of strips as a buffer when we launched the newspapers. Now, that wasn't nearly all the strips that we did. We didn't use a lot of them, mostly because the art style had changed and, the characters kind of solidified more about halfway through the development period. But yeah, when we launched with about, 8 months, which is good and bad, Technically that means 8 months of vacation if I ever want it. But also it puts a distance between you and what the readers are experiencing. If I ever get excited about a change in the comic or a story arc that I just did, I gotta now wait 8 months for the readers to experience that, which is kind of a bummer. And also it affects the way that you write, to know, the way that I write, to know that the deadline is that far out. This doesn't have to be perfect. I can come back and punch it up later. But I'm creating a comic every day, so I'm not guaranteed to come back and punch that up later. So I need to be a little bit closer to the deadline. That's my way of saying I've burnt a lot of my buffer, kind of frivolously. I think I'm down to about 2 months now. In fact, I took a week off to come here, so yeah. A month and 3 weeks.
So CXC owes you a buffer, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, well, you got them here, so you gotta make sure we get them.
I don't know what that would look like exactly, provide that, but I'm gonna work something out.
Well, I mean, what's also interesting, and the thing that I always found fascinating about comic strips versus comic books is the grind, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like your dog dies today, and what do you got to do tomorrow?
Yeah, you got to get up and draw a comic strip, a funny comic strip. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've worked through, all the holidays, all of that stuff. Everybody's getting up on Christmas morning. I got to get up extra early and try to bang out a comic strip so that I can enjoy that time with my family. Thanksgiving, and that's also how I ended up burning through a lot of my buffer, just taking time off that you feel like is normal time to take off. But you figure out quickly that a lot of people in this industry are working like right on the deadline. Like they start with the buffer and it slowly goes away and it doesn't come back unless you're willing to, really burn the candle at both ends and sort of claw it back. But it's hard enough just to keep up with the deadlines. So yeah, that buffer starts to go away and you find yourself working weird hours. But at the same time, the grind of it requires you to really figure out a very specific workflow for yourself. And once you get in that flow and, nothing catastrophic happens, it's a very smooth thing. I still have like my weekends and things. My workflow actually looks like on Monday I write 7 days worth of strips and nothing more. Even if I'm in the middle of a story arc, that's a few weeks, I still only write those next 7 days worth of strips. And then that's just like a couple of hours a day. And then I've got the rest of the day to myself. I don't try to draw anything or anything like that. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I do 2 dailies each. Get up in the morning, pull the script from my little notes file, put it in the comic strip, and it takes me about 3 to 4 hours per strip. So it ends up being about an 8-hour day to do 2 daily strips. And then Friday, I do a Sunday strip, which is like doing 2 dailies. Same thing. And then I have Saturday, Sunday off, and then it's Monday again. And like I said, it's like an hour. So it's kind of a 3-day weekend, almost half a day sort of a thing. But if I can stay in that flow, I can go for weeks and months without any problem. And it doesn't matter if there's a holiday or something. Like, you just got to do it. You signed a contract. Yeah, it's just it's unfathomable. No one would choose to do this, but that's the expectation of it, and it's part of the dream. It seems sort of how can you do it? It's inhuman. But once you get in the groove, you figure, oh, this is doable, and it's not even like destroying me mentally or anything. So you just kind of have to be doing it to get it, I think.
Well, another question I have, moving away from development into the strip itself, I'm really fascinated by sort of the difference between the problem with Jamal and then going into Crabgrass. Like, how much of Jamal is in Crabgrass, and if you can tell us a little more about what made you decide to center sort of this nebulous, why 80s, 90s? Why not the late 90s and the aughts, right? Yeah. Or and why center these two characters? What were you thinking?
Well, with Jamal, I finally learned the lesson. Write what you know, write what you're passionate about, and stop trying to jump on whatever pop culture bandwagon there is. And naturally, that was the first time I started to receive attention for my work. And when I went to Crabgrass, I sort of carried that lesson with me. You have to write what you know, what you're passionate about. I wanted to write about a childhood experience that reflected my own. So that would have been in the late 80s, early 90s, around that time. The choice to center these two characters, like I said, ended up being sort of pseudo-autobiographical. After a few strips, I realized, wait a second, I'm a black guy, and I was a little black boy, and my best friend was a redhead kid who lived next door, and I didn't even realize I was doing that. But yeah, I think that's why so much of myself was sort of injected into the comic strip. So if there's any part of Jamal that exists in Crabgrass, it's sort of that lesson of just like, draw something sincere from your actual self and not just what you think people will like.
And what about the decision? And what about the decision to specifically placed it like in that late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, that's what I grew up. Like that's my reference for childhood. I don't know if I would be successful drawing a comic strip about kids today. Like I didn't have a cell phone, when I was that age. I don't know if kids go out and play. I imagine they do, but I had to go outside to play.
Well, it's definitely a different vibe because
Yeah.
we're in the age of the parents here know the age of play dates. This idea that you make that the parents actually make a date to play, like it is much more structured. And I think that's what's interesting about your strip.
Yeah, no, when like in the very first strip, it kind of illustrates how I met my best friend when I was a kid. We were moving into the house and I was underfoot. And
We have that.
yeah, I think we do. Yeah, that's the one. It was almost exactly like that. We were moving into the house. I was underfoot. My mom was like, "See those kids over there? Go play with them." And I went over and was like, "My mom says I have to come play with you guys." Know you. But that worked when you were a kid. That's all you needed was proximity in order to just like be the best of friends. And we were best friends for years and years and years after that. It's different now. I don't think I made some friends, the last few days, but, you don't find yourself in situations where you're thrown in with other people and need to sort of form a bond as readily anymore. But yeah, when you were a kid, it really that's all it took. Somebody your size wandering into your field of vision and your best buddies. That's kind of what happened.
Well, one thing, I'm looking at the time. We are at 1:30, which means that we only have 20 more minutes. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm going to stop asking you questions and give the audience an opportunity to put you on the hot seat.
Sure.
I have a question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I read an article in the Cleveland paper, Plain Dealer, is it a Cleveland paper?
Yeah.
Basically saying that about adding you to their, picking you up for their lineup. And this occurred, if I'm remembering correctly, right when the Dilbert cartoonist, Scott Adams, performed a pretty amazing, public career self-immolation. And they were obviously looking for some new strips to sub out. Is that an isolated incident? Did you see a big uptick as people were like, "We're done with this dude"?
No, that was a big uptick.
Oh, really?
That was kind of life-changing, to be honest. It's funny because, that kind of hit the mainstream news all at the same time. And at the time on Facebook, I made a joke, like, haha, if any newspapers are looking for a new comic strip, I know a guy. And then in the following days, I started getting all these messages from people, "Hey, I just saw your comic strip in my paper." And I was like, cool, so apparently we got some of those slots.
How many pickups did you get?
Well, I got those. I started getting those messages, and I emailed our head sales guy, and I was like, "Hey, I just want to thank you for all the great work you've been doing. Apparently, you've really been pushing Crabgrass." And he's like, "Yeah, we need to talk." And so I got on the phone with him, and he said that we were able to put Crabgrass in the majority of slots that we needed to fill, and by like a pretty large margin. We ended up going from like 120 to 800 papers, which is a bonkers number. Yeah. Yeah, it's a total fluke.
So did you send Scott Adams a thank you card?
I don't know. I don't think he wants to hear from me. I don't think he wants to hear from me. But yeah, it's hard for me to be super mad at the guy, even after the things that he said. There's an asterisk there. But yeah, that was something. That was really huge.
Other questions? Yes.
I'm interested in your production technique. Do you draw digitally? Do you use painting?
Yeah, we're 100% digital. I haven't used a pencil and paper in, I keep saying 20 years, but I feel like I've been saying that for 20 years. But it's been a long, long time. In fact, the joke that I make is that not recently I needed to sign a check for something, had to turn the house upside down looking for a pen because I just don't own one. I do everything in Clip Studio Paint. I switched to that from Photoshop a couple years ago. It's just a really strong comic making tool, designed for manga, but it's got all the tools there for comic strips and stuff. I work on a Wacom Cintiq, I think 21-inch, and I've got it on an ergonomic arm so I can move it around my desk and stuff like that. But before that, I was working on an iPad Pro just fine. I thought that I was going to be super untethered and, out working in the forest or wherever I thought I was going to work. But the battery life isn't as good as advertised on those, and you end up tethered anyways. So when the comic launched in newspapers, I was like, all right, time for me to get the hardware, so the more reliable stuff. And so I moved back to Cintiq. But yeah, I've been doing everything digitally for now, which can be kind of a shame because I don't have those beautiful originals to trade with other cartoonists or even sell if I need to. But yeah, it's all digital for me for a while. Yeah.
Do you do your own coloring, or is that done by third party?
I do all my own coloring, which might have been a mistake. I had been working in webcomics for so long, I was doing everything RGB and not really prepping for print, not thinking it was a big deal. Like, I know it washes the colors out a little bit, but they'll be close enough. But for newspaper print, it is a big deal. Like you really need to have your palette down. And it took it actually showing up in newspapers for me to realize, a lot of the mistakes I've made. All you really got to do is go to gocomics.com to see the difference between the comic itself and the sort of title image. The colors that they're using for newspaper are really sort of dark and muted. So I've actually changed the palette that I'm using recently to.
From like RGB to CMYK.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, so Clip Studio forces you to work in RGB, but you add a filter that shows you what it'll look like in CMYK. So you choose your palette accordingly. Yeah. But it's such a good tool that I'm having to overlook that. But yeah, I do all my own coloring, lettering, all of that stuff. One-man show.
Yourself because we're all waiting for your spots.
Yeah. I am aware. Yeah.
Sorry.
I really shouldn't be doing interviews like this. Who knows what I'll say?
Yes.
I'm a complete outsider, but as I'm listening to you, not knowing about this strip or many others, I'm kind of curious, in contemporary Iran, filmmakers are using the vehicle of children for social commentary. It's safe to make a film about children and the experience of children and the perspective of children in the world, and then kind of show what the bigger social message is.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if that has any relevance for you and how that squares or doesn't with setting a narrative several decades ago, with all of the kind of contemporary narratives that are.
Yeah, it's hard for me to be super current, but then at the same time, there's a lot of parallels for things that are happening now that have just kind of always been happening throughout history. There's certain messages, things you can talk about that will just always be relevant, and like you said, putting it through the lens of a child's perspective sort of takes the teeth out of it, makes it a little easier for people to digest, which I find to be good. That's not a central focus of my comic strip. It is something that I dip my toe in every now and then when I feel it's appropriate. Mostly it's just these kids being crazy and doing nutty stuff. But yeah, every now and then I do like to just do a talking head comic where they just like have maybe a little bit too profound discussion for their age, and that's kind of me a sort of a self-insert where I just feel like I want to share some ideas that have been rattling around in my head about life or what's going on politically or not. That answers your question.
Well, kind of a follow-up to that. You have a set schedule, and then you have your buffer, which puts you on a delay. How often do you find that you have a story that you want to do that you feel needs to be a little more current? So you move it up in the queue. How often do you do that? And does that and if so, and when does that? How does that affect your workflow when you do that?
I have never done it.
Okay.
It's been detailed to me that I certainly have that ability to move things around. The deadline is, I think, 4 weeks for dailies and 6 weeks for Sundays. So at the very least, I've got that much time to move things around if I need to. And that would really just be a matter of changing the dates on some files in an FTP server. So it doesn't have to affect my workflow. I just, I like I said, I do 7 comics a week. As long as I do 7 comics that week, then I know that I am where I'm supposed to be. It doesn't matter which 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a really easy question. Has your redheaded friend been in touch and recognized themselves at all?
Nope. No, that is actually potentially contentious. That is no. Yeah, no. The guy that and I'm very careful not to say who he is or anything like that. And I rarely even really allude to the fact that he exists. But the guy and I are not friends anymore. Yeah, we just kind of grew apart into 2 very different people. We were super tight for, all of our teenage years, all of our 20s, kind of got into our 30s and had families and our values solidified more. And we had an actual final conversation where I was just like, okay, yeah, I need to sever that connection. But yeah, there's always the possibility that I could hear from him about royalties or something. I don't know. I hope that day doesn't ever come. But yeah, no, I'm not reaching out or anything. So. Oh, sure.
As sort of the reverse of an earlier question, not about moving something up, but given the nature of your strip, I'm wondering if you ever have to pull a strip because you decide that's really not going to work now because of something that's happened.
Yeah, I have done sort of that. I've never pulled a strip that's sort of slated to be like when I send the strips to AMU, I upload everything to an FTP server and then they process it, and that's the roster of strips that are going out. I've never pulled a strip that's already been processed, but in my personal buffer, I have gone back and decided, you know what, I don't like this story, or I don't like the way it went, or whatever, and then I'll yank that, and then I've got to scramble to fill that many strips back in, which is always tough. But yeah, it happens every now and then. Sometimes you look at something in a more sober light later on, and it's just not up to the standard, or you're just not really sure what you were thinking at the time. And yeah, it happens. Never for anything like controversial, I don't think. Although I have had a newspaper editor complain. I did one strip where Miles's father, Gene, was like grabbing him and like, kind of hollering at him. And a reader interpreted that as throttling him and wrote into the editor, why would you depict images of a child being choked? Well, I certainly wouldn't, but I also don't like the idea of drawing anything that people might interpret that way. So that's something that's like, okay, yeah, I'll have to keep that in mind later on. But it's just like, I kind of came up in the whole cartoon violence era. So I assume everybody interprets that as sort of silly and nonsensical, but no, it's 2023. Like, maybe frivolous depictions of violence aren't as cool as they once were. So, yeah, that's something that I carry with me going forward.
Are there other things that you've filtered or looked at and said, back in the late 80s, early 90s, that was cool, but it's not so cool anymore?
Well, sort of in the same vein, there's this first story arc where Kevin and Miles become best friends. They do this thing, which you would have found in popular media a lot in the 80s. They become blood brothers. And Kevin actually pulls out a little pocket knife and they cut their hands and they shake their hands. And I did that as a kid. And now people are like, no, that's just gross. Like, we're not gonna do that. So unhygienic and gross. And I was like, no, yeah, I get it. I also had a story where and this is stuff you can find on Go Comics because they ran everything from the development period on Go Comics, but you won't find it in any books or anything, or in any newspapers. But there was a story where Kevin has a crush on Miles's mom, and navigating that. And to me, that's a cute childhood story. Is that just me? Did not everybody do that, have a weird crush on their friend's mom? And I'm finding out that no, not everybody did that. I thought I was, penning this super relatable experience, and they're like, and I mean, a lot of people had crushes on teachers and things like that. And I guess the sort of, your friend's mom is off limits, but that was a thing I thought was great. Still one of my favorite stories, but yeah, you'll probably never see it in a book or anything.
Yes.
About this question about fan reactions. So, back in this era, people would write letters, probably send them to the syndicated or the newspaper. Obviously, I'm assuming you're seeing comments online, or are you getting emails? What's been the fan reaction?
Probably my biggest interaction with the fans comes from my Instagram account, actually. I posted all these comics online, and the Instagram audience really kind of came up with the comic. They were there from the beginning, and so they're like my home base. And I used to read all of the comments religiously, overwhelmingly positive. Nowadays, though, I don't read them so much. Every now and then I'll check in and I'll see a comic that's got like 200 comments, and I'll think, oh man, I must have really nailed it that day. But invariably it is 180 comments of people highlighting my spelling mistakes. Like an error got through and they found it, and then it's just like, yeah, they go to town. They catch everything. They're merciless. But yeah, overwhelmingly the experience has been positive, I think, as far as fan reactions go.
And can I ask one more?
Okay.
You own the intellectual property?
Yes. Yeah, I own everything. Yes.
Are there any other concerns about
No. At AMU, they're really all about making sure the creators are as happy as possible. They bend over backwards to make sure that you're happy as possible. All they really are concerned about is getting books out, and having a syndicate behind your back when it's time to launch a book is a fantastic thing anyways. So, they get it in as many newspapers as they can, try to get some word of mouth out, but all they really, really want, option rights to all kinds of merchandise, but all they really push nowadays is the books. So after you've been with them for a little while, if you've got some representation, you can get the rights back for those other things. But yes, as far as owning the strip and the characters and things like that, I'm the only one that can do it. If I leave, it leaves with me, all that good stuff. I got lucky going with AMU. I'm not sure how it is at other syndicates, but.
Along those lines, what about in terms of there's the beeline story of all of this seems to be is the grind, right? Do you think in terms of bringing on an assistant, and how would you anticipate that affecting things?
I have never considered that. It seems like a brilliant idea. Yeah, I'd have to figure out how to work them into my workflow. But to be honest, when it comes to actually producing the comics, I don't know that I would save a lot of time by letting someone else do the things that I would trust them with. When it comes to actually drawing the comics, that's the bulk of my workload, like the actual penciling and inking. I would never trust somebody else with that. Maybe colors, lettering, something like that, but that really, takes comparatively a few minutes compared to the major workload of drawing and inking. So I'm not sure. Okay, I guess I'm getting the signal now. I'm not sure how much I would benefit just yet. Maybe when I'm older and it's a little bit more taxing on me physically, I might bring someone in to help with that.
Okay, we are at 1:48, which means we have 2 minutes. Anybody got a quick question?
No, this is Dave.
Yeah, that's kind of her job, yeah.
Yes.
I don't mean to monopolize, but on the fonts, what do you use? Is it a tailored one or just
Yeah, I wish I could tell you the program that I use, but there's a lot out there that in fact you can use in a browser. But yeah, I handmade that font. Gathered some fonts that I liked, sort of merged them with my handwriting and got all the kerning and everything down, and then put it in Clip Studios, which immediately ignored all that. And but if I ever go back to Photoshop, it'll be beautiful. But yeah, that's a fully customized font that I use.
For your misspellings, I know they don't have a spell check.
Nope,
I
they do not.
highlight everything and then put it in Word, look for misspellings, change it, and put it back.
Yep, yeah, I'm familiar with that process as well. But also I have editors, and I'm just like, they'll catch that. Yeah.
Well, we have 1 minute. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Are the characters going to keep aging, or
Nope.
is the idea to keep them the same?
No. It's very, very much Peanuts or whatever. They're the same age forever and ever and ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for giving us your time. I mean, this has been
this was
wonderful.
awesome.
And all of you, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for indulging us.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.